Hello MCU fans! Today we're going to do a quick timeline recap for every major character appearing in the Thunderbolts movie. It is fascinating to see how all of their lives interweave throughout the history of the MCU. So there will be spoilers for pretty much every appearance of these characters, but as long as you're okay with that, then let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have an April contest running all month long. If you subscribe or leave a comment, you could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out in case you're interested. All right, so basically, we're going to follow all of their histories up to the last point where we see each character appear prior to their appearance in Thunderbolts. All right, so we actually start all the way back in November of 1943. And by the way, I'm using the dates from the official Marvel Timeline book. So we see Captain America rescuing Bucky from captivity, and in fact, they go on several missions together. However, in the mid-1940s is Bucky's ill-fated mission where, of course, he falls into the snow below and seemingly has died. In fact, on the memorial for Bucky, notice in the lower right-hand corner, it's listed actually 1944, but the timeline book simply says mid-1940s. Nonetheless, he is rescued by the Soviets from his fall into the snow, and ultimately it's Arnim Zola that turns Bucky into the Winter Soldier. As he says, "You are to be the new fist of Hydra." And in fact, during the 1950s and 1960s, the Winter Soldier is basically unfrozen, used for assassination, and then frozen once again. All right, so now we move to the late 1980s, and we see that the parents of Ava Starr, who eventually becomes Ghost, are killed while experimenting on a quantum tunnel. And unfortunately, a very young Ava is doused with those quantum particles and becomes infected. And then she is gathered up from the rubble and taken under the care of Bill Foster. So we will follow up with her again later. All right, so now we move to December of 1991. And granted, this is a what-if episode, but it's prior to the nexus point that created the branch. So we're actually learning things about the sacred timeline at this point. And we see that Dreykov is giving an assignment to the Red Guardian. Red Guardian says, "Dreykov, don't play dumb with me when I'm obviously smarter than you. You want me to go undercover as a data input manager in Ohio?" And Dreykov says, "Well, senior data input manager." But anyway, this is the mission that we're going to see Red Guardian going on in just a minute during the Black Widow movie. And we also see that Dreykov is working with an American sleeper agent, the Rook, who has intel on a high-value target. And in fact, we even see him calling a gentleman named Karpov, who is the gentleman who unfreezes the Winter Soldier during the Civil War movie. So let's jump to that, December 16th of 1991, when Howard and Maria Stark are killed. So the Winter Soldier is reactivated and indeed does go off on his mission to kill both Howard and Maria Stark. However, it's worth noting in the What If episode, after the nexus point, so after the branch is formed, we do see that Red Guardian doesn't go to Ohio and instead teams up with Bucky. And I bring this up simply because their camaraderie in this What If episode was awesome and gives us some hints as to how much fun they're going to be seeing them together in the Thunderbolts movie. All right, so now we jump to summer of 1995, which is the end of the mission that Red Guardian was sent on by Dreykov. So Ohio, 1995, and we see the Red Guardian there with his fake wife, Melina, and of course, his fake family. On the far left is Yelena, and on the far right is Natasha, aka Black Widow. So their mission is ending. In fact, he's telling them, remember when I told you that one day we would go on that big adventure? So they have to escape from Ohio, and they head back to meet again with Dreykov. In fact, we see the Red Guardian complaining that he's been there for 3 years. Remember, the mission started at the end of 1991, and now 3 years later, it's finally finishing. But the saddest part is to see that Natasha and Yelena are sent off to the Red Room. This scene was just heartbreaking in the movie, so hard to watch. All right, so now we move to the 2000s when we see that Ava, Ghost, is fitted with her containment suit, which she needed that to be able to handle all that quantum energy she was subjected to, and now she's working on missions for S.H.I.E.L.D. And in fact, that explains why during Secret Invasion, they were able to get Ghost's DNA. Totally makes sense when you realize she was working for S.H.I.E.L.D. All right, so now we continue in the 2000s with Black Widow's infamous Budapest operation. Her goal was to take out Dreykov, but then she realized at the last minute that Dreykov's daughter was there too, but she still went ahead with the mission, caused the explosion, and seemingly killed his daughter, Anatonia, but we will see her back again. All right, so it is worth mentioning, I know the timeline book just says the 2000s. I think this is 2008 because there's a deleted scene where Natasha talks about her being there for the Budapest mission 8 years ago. And of course, the Black Widow movie takes place in 2016. So just FYI, I do think this is 2008. All right, so now we move to 2009, where Natasha is explaining to Steve that she encountered the Winter Soldier 5 years ago and was basically shot by him. Of course, that's 5 years prior to the Winter Soldier movie itself, right? Captain America, the Winter Soldier. And in that movie, Hydra falls, and of course, Bucky returns. And of course, by the end of the movie, he's fighting off that brainwashing. So, because Hydra falls, that means Ava no longer has anyone to take care of her, and she returns to Bill Foster. And also we see Bucky visiting that Smithsonian exhibit, that one that said he died in 1944, and he's slowly regaining his mental capacity back again. All right, so that leads us to spring of 2016, where we see a superhero civil war erupting. And of course, it basically all erupted around Bucky. And in fact, in that final scene, it led to Captain America and Iron Man fighting over what to do about Bucky having killed Iron Man's parents. So yeah, Bucky has definitely been the source of a lot of conflict throughout the MCU. However, by the end of the movie, we see that Bucky begins his therapy in Wakanda as they're seeking to permanently remove the Hydra brainwashing. Okay, so we continue in the spring and even moving into the summer of 2016 as we see that Yelena is now freed from the mind control that she was put under when she was sent to the Red Room. And in fact, the person that freed her from it is telling her, free the others. So this really becomes a mission for Yelena to free her sisters from that mind control of Dreykov. So as part of that mission, they actually free her quote-unquote dad from prison, the Red Guardian. Notice he's bragging about fighting Captain America. We're all wondering exactly why he thinks he fought Captain America. But we also see him looking at this little figurine showing that yes, he still remembers those glory days and wishes he could bring them back again. So I love this scene where the quote-unquote family is slowly being reunited. We have Red Guardian with his fake daughter, Yelena, and he's just basically saying, let's just sit. But she's like, oh no, I got some things to say. To me, you were everything. It didn't matter that they were fake. To her, they were her family. But she says, the only thing you care about are your stupid glory days. So yeah, we're really seeing this theme of how important it is to the Red Guardian to be a hero again, to be respected, and that will play in the Thunderbolts movie. But then he does something so touching. He starts singing the American Pie, which is a song that meant so much to Yelena when she was a little girl, and they start singing it together. Ah, so sweet. So finally, they all sit down to the table together, not necessarily one big happy family, but all working together for a common goal, take down Dreykov. But first, they have to get through Taskmaster. So we learn that Taskmaster is actually Anatolia, who wasn't killed in that explosion, but now she has been mind-controlled by Dreykov and is forced to wear the suit, the Taskmaster suit, which of course lets her mimic the abilities of anybody she sees. So ultimately, she is also freed from mind control. And in fact, it's the former Black Widows that rally around her, along with Melina, who says, don't worry, we're bringing her with us. So we see Melina and Red Guardian getting ready to take off with Taskmaster and the former Black Widow agents that have been freed. But first, Natasha has a final message for Yelena. She says he, Dreykov, had widows implanted all over the world, but you should be the one to tell them it's over. So once again, Yelena is being tasked with this mission of freeing the other Black Widow agents still under Dreykov's control. So then finally we see Red Guardian, Yelena, Taskmaster, and those Black Widow agents taking off together and flying off into the sunset. And I really do mean sunset because we can now put the final appearance, until Thunderbolts of course, for two of the main characters. That would be Red Guardian and Taskmaster. The last we've seen them is in June of 2016. Isn't that crazy? It's been that long ago. All right, so now we move to fall of 2016. Really important thing happens during the Homecoming movie. We learn that Avengers Tower has been sold. Tony sold the tower, and we're relocating to a new facility upstate. So, of course, in the Thunderbolts movie, we will learn who bought that tower. Now we move to 2018, and we see that Shuri has finished clearing Bucky's conditioning, so he is free of the mental control that was put on him by Hydra. So then we move to spring of 2018, where Ghost goes on the attack, wanting her illness cured once and for all. And we also see that Janet is rescued from the quantum realm, which is a very opportune situation because she is able to give some of the healing particles that she had from being in the quantum realm. She gave them to Ghost to help her start the healing process. However, they weren't able to complete it because everyone has to split up when the cops arrive, and Ghost ends up taking off with Bill Foster. However, at the end of the Ant-Man and the Wasp movie, we see that Ant-Man has gone into the quantum realm to get healing particles for Ghost. So they were ready to help heal her. But we're going to see that it's going to take a while before she gets those particles. All right, so we also see that in spring of 2018, Yelena continues her mission of trying to free those Black Widow agents. She pins one down and says, "Stop, I'm trying to help you," and gives her the cure. But then they find out she actually wasn't under the mind control from Dreykov. She was doing everything of her own will. In fact, she tells them, "I'm doing the thing we're best at. I'm killing for money." So this is a really important line. I think this is the point when Yelena realizes, that's all I have left to do. There's nothing more for me in this life but to use my skill. And in fact, that's why we see her working with Val, but that's coming up. All right. Also, spring of 2018, that's the big battle against Thanos. So Bucky, who of course was already in Wakanda after having been healed, now has a new arm and he's ready to fight. In fact, that arm is very important because Rocket looks at him and says, "How much for the arm?" Of course, he looks down like, "Dude, you're not getting my arm." And he goes, Oh, I'll get that arm. And we'll see that he does in just a moment. But of course, the ending of the big Infinity War movie resulted in Thanos snapping and wiping out half the universe, which meant Bucky was blipped, Yelena was blipped, and the Ant family, unfortunately, was blipped, leaving Scott trapped in the quantum realm and unable to get those healing particles to Ghost. So we can now show that the last appearance of Ghost is May of 2018. But there is something important we learn that happens in between this appearance and the Thunderbolts movie, because there's an interview that Fandango had with all of the actors, and Hannah John Kamen, that plays Ghost, said, "I've got this whole different stance as Ghost. She's not vulnerable. She's not shaking. She's not an open nerve of fearing her death." And she added, "This is because of the quantum energy that Michelle Pfeiffer's Janet Van Dyne gave Ghost. It's this kind of control, which was this healing, where she's stronger than ever, which is dangerous." So that seems to imply that after everyone returned from the blip, they were able to give Ghost those healing particles. I really hope they bring that up in the movie, but that would explain how Ghost is still alive. In fact, I'm going to guess that Ghost was blipped, and that's how she survived up until that point. And speaking of the blip, it's time to move to the fall of 2023 with the Endgame movie, which had the time heist and, of course, the giant battle for Earth, and Bucky himself took part in that. And the end result was not only Hulk bringing everyone back, but, of course, Iron Man snapping his fingers and killing all of Thanos' troops. So then we see that Yelena returns from the blip, thanks to Hulk's snap, and immediately she asks, "Can you help me find Natasha? I need to tell her I'm okay." Of course, she soon gets the bad news that Natasha has died. Also in the fall of 2023, we see that Captain America gives the S.H.I.E.L.D. over to Sam. And of course, that's going to then kick off the events in spring of 2024 with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier series and their adventures and misadventures. I mean, one of the things we learn is that Bucky's arm is detachable. Who knew, right? Of course, that's going to come into play with Rocket before long. But also we see that Sam has given up the S.H.I.E.L.D., and then the government immediately gives it over to John Walker, who becomes the new Captain America. We learn that he was a military hero along with his best friend Lamar, and here we see him telling Lamar that he plans to take the super soldier serum, and thus John Walker himself becomes a super soldier. Unfortunately, it messes with his head, and when Lamar is killed by the Flag Smashers, he takes his brutal revenge and kills one of them. That results in him being stripped of the title of Captain America, but not long after that, Val swoops right in saying, "Hey, I've got a plan. We'll be in touch." And then we see in the summer of 2024 that John Walker does suit back up to help defeat the Flag Smashers, and ultimately he becomes the U.S. agent as Val officially puts him on the payroll. We also see throughout the entire series, but especially by the end, that Bucky is working to clear his ledger, basically to make up for anyone who was impacted by the horrible things he did while he was under Hydra mind control. And it looks like he's in a pretty good headspace by the end of the series, because here we see the kids playing with his vibranium arm, and yes, Bucky is actually smiling. All right, so this is the last time that we saw a U.S. agent before the Thunderbolts movie, so July of 2024. All right, so then we move to December of 2024, and we see that indeed, Yelena has decided to become a paid assassin working with Val. She says, "You're not supposed to be bothering me on my holiday time, Valentina. I want a raise." But Valentina says, "Well, maybe you'd like a shot at the man responsible for your sister's death." So yeah, she is being hired to now kill Hawkeye. Craziness, right? And in fact, it was Eleanor Bishop, Kate Bishop's mom, that made that call, or maybe even worked with Kingpin to arrange this. So I'm still wondering if Kingpin and Val aren't working together as a team. I think that would be so cool if they ultimately reveal that. Nonetheless, Yelena does indeed take off to try to kill Hawkeye. They have some incredible fights, but in the end, Yelena realizes it was not Hawkeye's fault and that there was actually nothing he could have done about Natasha's death. So sadly, Yelena walks off, and in fact, we will not see her again until the Thunderbolts movie. So her last appearance was December of 2024. So now we move to spring of 2025, and we learn that Val is the director of the CIA. It's not clear whether she's been the director all this time, but certainly by this point, she is indeed director, and that's her ex-husband, Everett Ross. And we even see that Val is working with the government to attempt to destabilize Wakanda. The reason is she wants vibranium. So Ross says, well, what if US was the only country in the world with vibranium? And she says, oh, I actually dream about it. So yeah, you can tell that she is very power hungry, and you do wonder if she's been dreaming about adamantium now that that's been discovered. Anyway, this is the last time we see Val before the Thunderbolts movie, May of 2025. All right, so now we have to go to December of 2025, the Guardians Holiday Special, because Nebula gives Rocket a gift. Bucky's arm. So I'm really curious to see if they pick up on this during the Thunderbolts movie. Supposedly, by the way, this was James Gunn getting revenge for Marvel killing off one of his characters, Gamora, and making him have to deal with that. So he's like, fine, we'll just take Bucky's arm. That's so funny. All right, so now we move to April of 2027 for Brave New World, Captain America Brave New World, where Ross is telling Sam, I want you, Captain America, to help me rebuild the Avengers. Of course, by the end of the movie, that has not yet happened, and we'll see the ramifications of that in the Thunderbolts movie. And of course, Bucky shows up, pays a visit to Sam. We learn that Bucky is said to be a future congressman, so not yet a congressman. I'm really interested to see how that all plays out. And we see that he's off to catch a plane to a campaign fundraiser. So this is the last we see of Bucky before the movie in April of 2027. And I'm just going to put question marks by Bob. Now, in the comics, there is a storyline, which I won't spoil in case it actually ends up being something they use in the movie. But let's just say we may find out that Bob's been around for a lot longer than it seems. Or they may not go with that storyline at all. So I'm just going to use question marks there, and we'll have to wait and see what they do. But look at these dates. Isn't this wild? All the way back to June of 2016 for the last time we saw Red Guardian, and all the way up to April of 2027 for the last time that we've seen Bucky. In fact, speaking of, from a timing standpoint, I think the Thunderbolts will start at least in May of 2027, because they're at this event. We see this poster in the background honoring the fallen heroes of the Battle of New York. That, of course, took place in May of 2012, so I'm betting this is the 15th anniversary celebration for that battle and the victory, and thus it's May of 2027. So we'll have to wait and see. All right, so there you go. That is what everyone has been up to leading into the Thunderbolts movie. I hope this helped you as much as it helped me. I'd forgotten some of these details, so it's always fun to lay it all out to get all the more excited. I've got tickets, and I cannot wait. It is going to be an incredible movie. So don't forget about that April contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook. And there's the membership option in case you're interested in that. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.